Indeed, no.
I hope everyone is having as beautiful a day as I am here. It's bright, sunny, in the mid-70s, lovely day.
The joys of being in upstate New York. It's a little bit warm and humid where we are in Bethesda. Maybe more so for David.
Yeah, it's I can't complain. It's been in the 70s, 80s. It's been lovely. I
Our
like
summer here definitely makes up for the winter.
I guess everyone is either taking a bathroom break or grabbing their lunch or breakfast or something before joining the webinar, depending on your time zone.
Yeah.
Well, to respect everybody's time and give us enough time for questions at the end, I think we'll start, and anybody who joins from here on out will just have to catch up best they can. I'm really pleased to welcome our expert panelists today. They're going to be talking about funding your research, and it will run the gamut from early career starter funds to NIH funds. Our first speaker is going to be Tu Le, who's a professor of medicine and chief of the Division of Nephrology at the University of Rochester. And she's part of the core for career development in the CTSI at the U of R. Our other speakers are from NIDDK. Dr. Susan Mendley, who's program director, the Division of Kidney Urologic and Hematologic Disease, including pediatric kidney disease. She's the previous division chief of pediatric nephrology at the University of Maryland. And Raquel Greer, who's a program director at the Division of Kidney Urologic and Hematologic Disease, is involved in the health equity program at NIDDK. And importantly for this webinar, she's also very involved in the KUH loan repayment program and K-23s. She's runs both of those programs, or she's resource, or she'll tell us what exactly she does there. We'd like to start with two, kind of in the order of career development. And two, if you want to share your screen, and
Yes,
Excellent.
can you see my screen now?
it's not in presenter mode. We still see the slides on it.
Yes, so let me just see if I can put that. Is that
There you
okay
go.
now? Okay, great.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate the organizers for involving me in this very important topic for particularly early stage investigators. It's always been my passion to mentor, and so you know, after I just want to let you know that I'm available for all of you at any time. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions after this talk. I first would like to also acknowledge that these slides that I'm showing you today were kindly provided to me by Dr. Lori Steiner, who is Associate Professor of Pediatrics and is also the Director of our Academic Research Track and Medical Student Research Programs here at the University of Rochester. She is Associate Professor in neonatology. So these slides were slightly modified from for the purpose of this particular talk. I was asked to really focus on primarily the earlier grants, particularly the pilot as well as foundation grants. But I just thought maybe just first basically say what kind of research can really be funded. Really most kinds of research, ranging from basic science to translational, clinical research, qualitative studies, implementation science, public health, quality improvement, and education research. And really the key is to understanding which funding agencies and sources are likely to support your type of academic work or research. So why apply for research funding? It supports your salary, it supports your time for research, supports supplies as well as technical advice. You know, you could even use the funding to really get a biostatistician to help you do some sort of analysis, or a bioinformatician to help you do big data analysis. It's a great tool for career development. It provides you protected time, and I will let our NIH, NIDDK panelists tell you what kind of protected time will be afforded to you, particularly for F grants as well as K grants. It also can help you explore new academic and career focus, and funding gets more funding. You know, once you establish a track record of funding, study sections really like that, because that's really a way for you to say that you've been successful at carrying out your proposal, and so you get rewarded further for that. There's also a loan repayment program that I'm pretty sure our NIH panelists will tell you about that later on in this session. So different types of funding, different levels of risk tolerance. Internal awards are typically provided by institution or the department in which you're at. You know, you get pilot awards, training awards. Foundation awards are primarily focused for trainees as well as early stage faculty. And of course, NIH has a series of awards, including the F series, which is the individual fellowship awards, the training grants, which is really instituted by the institution but funded by NIH, the loan repayment program, and then the early faculty development K awards that you will hear about later. So in terms of the level of funding, you know, typically internal or pilot grants give you somewhere between $5,000 to $50,000 within a particular institution or department. And then foundation awards as well as career development awards. And if you're lucky enough to be both at an academic institution that has an affiliation also with the Veterans Administration, you could also take advantage of the career development award that the VA has. And so these awards, particular foundation awards, range somewhere between $50,000 to $100,000. The career development awards administered by NIH and the VA career development awards are typically around $125,000 to $150,000. The R1 and VA merit, which is kind of a similar, or I guess you could call an R1 equivalent from the VA, typically funds somewhere around $250,000 or more. So these are all very impactful depending on where you are in your career. And so in terms of the internal funding, you know, typically they are pilot awards. They accept a little bit of high risk. So I can give you an example of, you know, if you come up with a good idea, but you don't necessarily have already any preliminary data, these types of pilot grants are really for you to acquire the preliminary data for you to apply for further funding. So as long as you have a really good idea and you have you know, appropriate support and resources or technical expertise to help you, these pilot awards are really going to be impactful in terms of helping you generate the preliminary data. They're again smaller grants, but I have seen particularly, I can give you you know, the anecdote of our Department of Medicine here. We have a Department of Medicine pilot award, and our return of investment has been $16 in grant funding generated for every dollar that has been invested in an investigator. So these small grants can be very impactful in helping you generate preliminary data. They still require, even though they're small grants, they still require a good idea and they still require a great proposal. And you could also take advantage of using these pilot grants to basically mentor a fellow or a resident to help you acquire some preliminary data for your project. So take advantage of that. In terms of the different types of funding and foundations, I am told that the audience here is primarily neonatologists interested in kidney disease. And so, you know, I'm listing here some of the grant funding mechanisms from various foundations. They're small grants, but again, as I mentioned, they can be highly impactful. They're more risk tolerant than NIH grants. They often offer awards for fellows, and they are typically, many of them are actually designed to support junior faculty members. And some foundations prohibit the use of funding to support PI salaries. So you have to really understand what these foundations or agencies really support, and you have to really read what the budget is allowed for. And also keep in mind that you can apply for these grants very broadly. Most of the time, they don't allow you to double dip, but apply for one particular grant. You can apply for many different foundations, depending on whether or not it falls or is aligned with the mission of the foundation. But do look at the March of Dimes, look at the American Heart Association, the American Society of Nephrology research website to give you a list of grants that they typically support. Satellite healthcare is something that has actually been very helpful for me in my career. It's administered through the Norman Copeland grant, and I was able to actually get $50,000 a year for 3 years to do very basic fundamental research and understanding how a particular protein regulates blood pressure. But that allowed me to actually gather enough data and allow me to be able to use the money to generate a particular conditional knockout mouse line to then later on be able to obtain an R1. So again, very highly impactful, and so do take advantage of these funding mechanisms. So most importantly, no matter where you are in your stage of your research career, your research plan is very important. It is weighed very heavily, no matter what the funding mechanism is. And I just want to take a few minutes to go over some of the unique aspects of grants that are targeted to postdoctoral fellows as well as early faculty. So, you know, when you craft a research plan, you want to ask yourself, is this work impactful? Can you convince yourself that this is important? You know, to me, it's a so what question, right? How does it advance the field? You know, how does the work that you propose address a knowledge gap in the field? And can you build on this work to support your future career? The reviewers are always looking at, where is this leading? You know, are you going to take this to the next step? You know, is this going to establish your career in the future? Is this going to help, you know, change a therapeutic decision or anything for that matter? How impactful is it? Is it feasible? Do you have the resources? Do you have the supplies? Do you have the skill sets that are supportive for you? You know, do you have the right mentorship? Do you have the technical expertise to help you carry out the work that you are proposing? And through this research plan, are you actually able to build additional skills that you don't already have that will be important for you to further your research career? So in terms of the budget, that's also very important for any kind of grant funding mechanism. You know, you have to go and look at the specific website or funding agency to look at what they allow for the budget. But typically, a budget will cover for salaries, either yours or that of a research coordinator or a technician, supplies, equipment, publication fees, and sometimes travel for meetings. So budget terminology, something very important for you to think about. Direct costs, that really is the funds that go directly to you and your research project. And indirect costs is really the funds that actually go to the university that provides you the infrastructure for you to do your research. And so you do not see the indirect costs. So only the direct costs go to you for salary, as well as supplies or animal, you know, animal husbandry or animal models that you need to carry out your research. So depending on the institution, the indirect cost really varies. But, you know, and I can just tell you, at least at University of Rochester, our indirect cost is 0.54. So for every dollar of direct cost that we get here, the NIH will give $0.54 for indirect costs to the University of Rochester. Some career development awards actually do not pay indirect costs. And so now that you have kind of an idea that you want to do research, and you have an idea of what it is that you want to do, what kind of research project you want to do, I think the most important thing is really to figure out which funding sources are most appropriate for your type of work. Where do you send your grant? So, you know, start with your mentors, start with talking to your colleagues, discuss in advance with a program officer or the funding at NIH or the funding agency. So your grant has to really align with the programmatic needs of the funding resource. And I can give you an example of when I actually had to talk to an NIH program officer and direct my grant to a different institute. So I was interested in looking at the effect of hemodialysis access in terms of the effect for right heart failure as well as pulmonary hypertension. And because I was actually looking at a phenotype that is not kidney related, even though I was working with a kidney disease population, NIDDK was actually not interested in funding such a grant. And because it's a heart and lung phenotype, the grant actually ended up going to NHLBI. So again, you really have to look at the mission and the programmatic needs of the funding agency to make sure that your grant is directed appropriately. You should also ask your department for an example of a successful funded grant. So, you know, a lot of departments have actually grants that they store, and investigators allow their successful grants to be shared with other investigators. So ask your department or ask your institution. That's really important for you to start. If you don't know how to start writing a grant, it can give you a kind of a template for what's a successful grant. Tips for writing a successful grant application: it's never too early to start. You know, once you start, I can tell you that oftentimes the specific aims page that you first began with will look entirely different once you in the final product. It will go through several iterations. The bigger the grant, the earlier you have to start. You have to have a focused question and identify how answering that question will fill a knowledge gap, as I mentioned earlier. Address how you will deal with potential pitfalls, talk about rigor and reproducibility, and make sure that it's clearly written. It's better to be clear than to be dense. And discuss your ideas with multiple people, and this will help you refine them. Have at least one trusted mentor carefully read your grant and give you honest feedback. You want a critical feedback for your proposal. There's never ever a perfect proposal. And if there are K clubs at your institution, attend them so you can hear what the discussions are, and it kind of hone your skills in terms of what you think, in terms of what is needed for a successful grant proposal. So in terms of grantsmanship, you know, writing grants and keep writing them is where you actually learn the skills of how to write a good grant. How you present a grant is going to be extremely important. Even if you have a great idea, but if you don't know how to communicate that idea in a clear manner, it's not likely going to be successful. There are some also common unwritten rules about putting together a grant. And you know, when your application breaks these rules, you will get some critiques regarding the grantsmanship, and you will learn along the way what those grantsmanship items are. So common grant killers, if your grants are interdependent. So let's say that the success of AIM 2 is dependent on the success of AIM 1. So you don't want your aims to be interdependent. You want them to be separate from each other, but highly integrated. So an integrated grant with integrated aims is highly important, but they have to be separate and independent. Don't lose the forest for the trees. It should describe your group of experiments. The methodologies have to be clear, but not dense. It should not be a technical paper. It should not be a methodological type of grant, but it should convey concepts, and it should convey also your ability to think about pitfalls and how you can actually interpret the data. So that's going to be really important. Another common grant killer is leaving out key references or key data from the literature that is already known. Misspellings, too many bolding or underline, etc., or if the figures are too small to read. In terms of grant scoring driving criteria, I think most funding agencies have very similar structure of grant scoring as the NIH. Typically, they look at the investigator, how productive he or she has been, you know, through their career stage. Do they have a potential to be a successful independent investigator? Is the concept of the grant or the technical aspect of the grant innovative? Is the research impactful? Is it feasible? Is it sufficiently distinct from the mentor's research? And then also they look at the environment. Do you have the proper environment to help you? Meaning that, do you have the proper mentorship? Do you have the proper institutional support? Do you have the resources that are available that will allow you to conduct your research plan? And then also they look at the training potential as well as the mentorship. So how do you position yourself to be competitive? Again, starting with a good idea, the so what question. Can you answer that? Can you convince yourself that this is important? Can you convince others that this is important? Refine the idea by reviewing the literature and discussion with colleagues. Publications can also help. You know, you can get internal awards without publication because those are really designed for you to get preliminary data for publication. But if you go further in advance, you know, as particularly for F training grants and K awards, they look at your publication record. And establishing a track record of funding, you know, study sections look very favorably at those who have actually been able to get prior funding. So why don't some grants get funded? Sometimes great grants don't get funded because it just doesn't really fall in line with the programmatic needs of a particular funding agency. But it could be funded by another funding agency, depending on the fit. You know, you also want to ask the program officer or the funding agency program officer, you know, whether or not your grant is going to the right study section. Does the study section have the appropriate expertise to review your grant? Does the subject matter align with the priorities of the study section or funding group? And you know, you also want to make sure that you have the proper mentorship to really help you direct where your grant should go to. And I'm going to skip here because I think that our NIH panelists will actually tell you how to use the NIH assisted tool to really identify the proper institute as well as the proper study section where your grant should go to. So common misconceptions about funding: if you have funding, the study section will be hesitant to give you more. That is not exactly the case. You cannot have the same exact project, you know, and funded by two different grant mechanisms, but you want to make sure that you can show that you have a track record of funding. You also, you know, there's another misconception that if you don't get a good or favorable score, that the study section doesn't want to see your proposal again. That is not the case. The study section always wants to make sure that the science is done properly, that you get the proper training, et cetera, and that they're happy to see your revised proposal. And you want to make sure to be very responsive to the critiques. And most importantly, about resilience in academic medicine, only the top 10 to 20 applications are funded. So try again. I can give you my own experience. Most of the time, my grants take 2 to 4 tries before it can get funded. One grant actually took 10 tries. This was an R1. So it's okay. You know, you just have to develop a thick skin and resubmit and make sure that you respond to the critiques. And again, learning where the study section is most appropriate for your grant to go to is very, very important. And I certainly learned that lesson. And don't get discouraged. Don't take it personally. You know, the study section really are there to help you do your best science, and don't be discouraged. So I just want to end here. Lots of ways to get funding for research project. Mentoring trainees early on to apply for internal awards is a really great way for you to get projects off the ground, as well as having mentorship under your belt. Start early, don't rush. You know, it takes at least 6 months to put together a really good grant, and take advantage of the resources of your institution for putting together your application. And all of us have experienced rejection. Don't take it personally. Resubmit, revise, resubmit. And I will stop there, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks, too. I think we'll save questions to the end. We'll let Susan and Raquel say their piece.
Sure,
I'm
thank
not
you.
sure who's going to go first or say what.
I am leading off, but it's tag team. Thank you all very much for the invitation to this webinar. Raquel and I are going to do this as a tag team. We're going to move very quickly through these slides because I really do want to make sure that we have time for questions, because that's most important. These slides are a joint effort from lots of DK staff. Are you seeing the screen? Okay, great. Hold on. And can I move it? Yes. Okay, this is a brief outline. First of all, NIH and NIDDK just 101. We are from NIDDK. Each institute is different. You guys also seek funding from NICHD and other institutes, so keep that in mind. We'll give you a quick overview of what we do, what a grant life cycle is like, and I want to give you some resources that you can work with, and I'm going to give you these slides so you can use them. A few tips for success, and which you've already heard it to much greater degree and really beautifully done by two. So I don't think we have much to add there. And then early career opportunities, which Raquel is most familiar with. And there's the take-home message right there. Contact your program officer. Don't give up. Okay, so the NIH funding cycle, if you're not familiar with it, it takes about 9 months, 9 months to make a baby, about 9 months to get a funded application. And as Tu says, it's rarely the first time. You're going to think of a really great idea. You're going to come up with some draft specific aims, and you're going to go to the smart people around you and really hone them. And then you're going to talk to a program officer, and we'll tell you how you find the program officer who's right for you. That's where the game kind of starts. You're going to get ready to submit your application. You're going to look at study section rosters, and Tu told you about that, because you're going to try to decide if there's an study section assignment that's going to serve you well. There's the form for the request. I'll talk some more about how you work your way towards that instead of just asking for it. You can ask, but you want to really work your way into it, not just ask. Division of Receipt and Referral receives your application. Make sure it's within the mission of the institute you thought it was, if it's complete, and if the institute participates in the funding mechanism that you've applied to. And then it goes to the Center for Scientific Review, or sometimes to an individual institute's review branch, and there are circumstances where that occurs. It's received, they make an assignment to a study, to a review group. Looking at your request form, but also doing their own internal work. A scientific review officer, I'm sorry, I'm trying to translate all these acronyms. A scientific review officer assigns reviewers who will read and review your application. They will, at a meeting, they will rank all of the scores before the meeting and only discuss the top half of the scored applications. So they are, the bottom half are what we refer to as not discussed. A summary statement is prepared for the meeting. Now, if you are not discussed, you get the comments from the 3 reviewers, but if it was actually discussed, you'll get the synthesis of the discussion as well brought to you. And then, based upon the priority score or percentile that you get from this review group, you may or may not achieve the funding, reach a funding line. So then if you do achieve a fundable score, you may hear from a program officer again. Before that time, advisory council will review to see if they concur with the recommendation of your institute staff. And then either money goes out the door because you win, or you're going to go back and resubmit your application because you're going to take into account, as Tu said, the excellent comments from the really smart people who read your work. And what would they think you should do differently? And you're going to start the cycle around again, and you may go around this several times before you actually arrive at a fundable project. We are NIDDK, so this is what we do. We fund medical research and research training to disseminate science-based information on a host of diseases, but we're going to focus on kidney and urologic diseases. And I know it's a little bit small, but it comes from our webpage, so you don't actually have to memorize it. There's a very broad range of kidney research that we fund, but we do look at kidney research. So if you have there are many aspects of neonatology that would fit into this, but many that might not, and then you would be looking at a different institute. So where do you start? Well, as Tu already told you, you need a compelling question or set of questions. You need to honestly assess your skill set. Do you have what it takes to answer those questions, or you do need collaborators, assistants to do that? The mentorship question I'm going to set aside for Tu, but you do need a realistic scope of work and a realistic timeline, depending upon the mechanism that you're choosing to apply to. You need a lot of perseverance. And then you need some information. So where would you find it? NIH actually has a lot of really useful information on their own website at grants.nih.gov. This is actually interesting and worth perusing. They actually have a whole section on how to apply. And there are even successful R01 applications that experienced investigators have actually made available. So you can view, as Tu mentioned, your department may have it, but there are some here also. Lots of useful links. Highly recommend you take a look at this. Because a lot of questions you might ask me, I would go here to get the answer anyway. Also, there's news that you can sign up to receive a subscription. You can find information that you might not have been aware of. All of that is available to you through the Office of Extramural Research at NIH. I hope many of you are familiar with NIH Reporter, and that's where you can search essentially all funded projects from NIH, and you can find out what other people in your area are doing. And in particular, the Matchmaker tool, where you can enter the abstract and the specific aims that you are considering applying with, and it will show you similar projects if you'd like to know what other people are doing in the field. Or it may send you to a program official or to an institute that you were not aware of. So give it a try. It's helpful as you're working through your research plans and your specific aims page. Why should you contact your program officer? Well, we might tell you that your project as ToLearn falls within NIDDK's mission or another institute. We don't like to say we're not interested in your work. I think I would say we can't steal work from other institutes. If your outcomes are cardiac, then I can't take your work because I'm stealing from them. So you want to apply to the right award type for your proposed study to the right institute. And you want to make sure that the institute participates in a particular project, a particular award type. We may be able to help you navigate processes and timelines. Sometimes we'll send you to a different program officer at NIDDK, or
Open it and I will tell you.
you might want to mute yourself, Kashif. Also, we might be able to give you more scientific or administrative considerations you hadn't thought of. It's a very good idea to send us an email with a one-page specific aims. It's much better than cold call. And you can't really just call up and say, I'm thinking about a project about this. It's just very hard for me to be helpful to you. So I can respond to specific aims pages. I could read them. I could say this makes sense, or this doesn't make sense, or I can't figure out what you're really trying to ask here. Sometimes we can answer a question by email, but often for junior folks, it's better to schedule some time and we'll talk. If you don't get an answer promptly, please, send me another email a week later, because I don't mean to ignore you. This is what I get paid to do. You can sign up to receive regular weekly funding updates. Also, NIDDK has a website for current research opportunities. So you can take a look at that. The Center for Scientific Review has a public face. They're not all secret. It's not all behind closed doors. There are new review criteria coming, so you can read about those. I really want to point out the benefits of the early career reviewer. To mention the idea of talking to, the K group. This is the ultimate K group. You can sit in a room where experienced, successfully funded investigators are looking at applications. You will be asked to review an application. You'll participate in discussion. Several pediatric nephrologists have done this and found it to be extremely valuable. This is the assisted referral tool that Tu mentioned, and I highly recommend you do this, but you start early, because it's not uncommon that 2 days before someone's going to submit, I get a call and say, which review group should I request? And you can ask for what you want, but CSR is also going to use a tool just like this one. And by the way, they're not storing your information. You can put in the title and you put in the basically the abstract and specific aims, and it will give you the top 5 or 6 review groups that the computer thinks most often reviewed applications like yours. If it surprises you, it may mean either that you're going to a different review group, or you may wish to tweak the way you have written your abstract and specific aims to enhance the frequency of certain words, of certain themes, so that it feels more like what you think you're doing. You can do this as often as you want. Let me explain how we make funding decisions. We base it really on peer review, on the scores you receive, and with advisory council review. Most R01 and other investigator-initiated grants are funded on a pay line or percentile, but ICs have have processes to consider grants that fall below the pay line. That is dependent upon how much funding Congress gives us. So there are some considerations for grants that are would not otherwise be funded. I think I saw a question in the chat. What about if you're not a citizen? R01s, you do not need to be a citizen to apply for an R01. Other pilot grants may have different issues, but R01s you don't need a citizenship requirement. Raquel will talk about career awards, which do. For K awards and most RFAs, we consider funding scored applications within a range. There's not a clear pay line for an RFA or which is now called a NOFO, a Notice of Funding Opportunity, or for K awards. And each IC has its own funding policy. This is what NIDDK's funding policy looks like. Here's the website in case you were curious where to find it. An established investigator, the pay line, an established investigator would have to score at the 13th percentile. Now, I just want to point out to you, that sounds very grim, but the overall success rate for NIDDK applications is currently about 22%. That's a crude number. That's the number of awards divided by the number of applications, but that's just to tell you that resubmissions are actually doing considerably better. So it's not 13% forever, it's 13% in any given funding cycle. An early stage investigator, we are much more lenient, and so you can have a score at the 25th percentile or better. Remember, an ESI is within 10 years of your terminal degree or the end of your postgraduate training for most of the people on this call. If you have an R01 as an ESI, your first renewal would be scored at you need to score at the 16th percentile. So you get a bit of a boost compared to an established investigator for your first competitive renewal. A so-called large grant is one that has more than $500,000 in direct costs. And that requires a pay line. You have to meet the 8th percentile. That's a very stringent pay line. And you also need approval from NIDDK before you submit that. So otherwise it would never go to review if you had not requested approval. You talk to your PO for that. I'm going to pause here. I'm going to let Raquel tell us about early career opportunities. And tell me, Raquel, how you just want me to advance slides or whatever you think.
All right, thanks, Susan. You can advance to the next slide.
Okay.
All right, so this figure illustrates that NIDDK as well as other ICs have funding opportunities at every career stage, from high school students and undergrads to postdoctoral fellows to junior faculty to more established investigators. And I'm going to provide a broader overview of the K awards and the LRP, but if you have questions about any of these other mechanisms, I'll be happy to answer questions about those. Next slide. Yes, so before I discuss the K award and LRP, I did just want to mention a few strategies to consider as you're working to launch your research careers. You know, as fellows or junior faculty, you may not have a lot of resources to support conducting your own research project that requires a lot of primary data collection, so recruiting your own patients and securing samples, et cetera. And so it's important to consider ways to leverage existing resources and infrastructure, such as conducting secondary data analyses on publicly available data, or conducting ancillary studies of ancillary projects of existing studies. So there are many prospective studies and trials that have available data and biospecimens, which you can propose to use to conduct your own work and really jumpstart your research career. So it's really important to be aware of the studies that are doing work related to your own. And as Chi previously stated, there are opportunities to secure pilot funding to support pilot studies to gain the preliminary data that's necessary to secure a K or secure an R01. And so these are just some of the larger center grants and consortium within NIDDK that have pilot and feasibility funds available for early stage investigators. And the first two on the list, the Pediatric Centers of Excellence in Nephrology and the Kidney O'Brien Centers, are probably the most relevant to this group. Next slide. So now I'm going to focus in on the K Awards. The K Awards are mentored career development awards that protect 75% of your time over 5 years to obtain the research skills, experience, and the preliminary data to secure an R01 and really establish your independent investigator career. And it's such a rich opportunity to launch your research career because it provides so much protected time, which is hard to come by in academic medicine. And so this slide just lists the different types of K Awards that are available. The K01 is focused on PhD investigators that are proposing basic or clinical research. The K08 and K23 focus on clinician investigators who are proposing either basic science or clinical research. The K25 is specific to doctoral candidates in quantitative science proposing biomedical research. And the K99 and R00 is a pathway to independence, and it's the only training grant that NIDDK has that's available to non-US citizens. Next slide. I also wanted to spend some time talking about the loan repayment program. And essentially, this is an incentive to encourage more investigators to stay in academic medicine and pursue research careers. It pays up to $50,000 per year towards your educational loans for 2 years, and it's renewable. So you can continue to submit renewal applications until your loans are paid off. And I'm one of the people that have done just this because it's really just an excellent resource that's available to those to really support just staying in academic medicine. And so the LRP supports investigators proposing clinical research, pediatric research, which is relevant to this group, health disparities research, and clinical research from individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds. The one to keep in mind is that gray one that's focused on research in emerging areas critical to human health, or the REACH program. And that bucket is for all the other research that's not contained in those 4 other research programs. And every NIH IC is different. And so if you're thinking about applying to the REACH program, I encourage you to look at the IC specific information to determine what their research priority areas are and what they would fund within that category. Next slide. This slide just lists the different eligibility criteria for the LRP. And unfortunately, like most of the training programs at NIH, it's limited to citizens, nationals, or permanent residents of the US. You have to have a doctoral degree. You also have to demonstrate they have substantial educational loan debt, which is defined as at least 20% of your annual base income. You also have to propose research that you can conduct within that 2-year period. And then you have to commit at least 20 hours to research. And this program is really targeted towards postdoctoral fellows and faculty. And again, it's just another opportunity to take advantage of if you're pursuing a research career. Next slide. Yes, so yeah, I just want to give you all a brief overview and make sure that we had enough time to field questions from the group.
So the first question is for Susan, and that's from Esther. Does NIDDK recognize new investigator status for investigators who are not ESI?
The NIDDK no longer, in fact, NIH no longer has a criteria for new investigators. So we have an ESI category, and that's all. Let me say, we recognize it, and it's recognized in review. So I misspoke. It's recognized in review, and new investigators are often grouped with ESIs for the purposes of review, so that reviewers understand that this is someone who has not had has not had R01 experience, but the pay line remains the same. So it's known in review, but the pay line is still the same.
There was also a comment by Esther that talked about VA merit grants. And it really goes towards the VA merit grants being applicable for the adult colleagues, not necessarily for pediatric nephrologists or neonatologists. So just something to think about.
I don't have enough familiarity to comment on that.
Yes, and that is correct because especially for physician scientists who see patients at the VA, you know, that's when you really get the opportunity to take advantage of the VA grant mechanisms. And you are correct. Certainly the VA population is not a pediatric population, and so that does limit to a certain extent. Unless you are a PhD doing full-time research, even in developmental biology, I think that's still is possible at the VA. But for physician scientists, it definitely is a little bit limited.
What about if you wanted to do later manifestations of early kidney disease? So, you know, the neonatal and pediatric kidney injury resulting in later chronic kidney disease, if you could creatively make a link, would that be feasible?
Yeah, so you're saying like developmental origin of disease, is that right, Ronnie? So you could, but I think for most VA grants, you have to have 5/8 VA effort. And what that means is that you have to have typically it's designed so that you have to have some clinical work that is done at the VA beforehand in order for you to actually even be able to apply for a VA merit. But I think that there are some local VA institutions that are willing to bend the rules a little bit. So it's always very important for you to speak to the scientific officer at the VA to see whether or not that is certainly a possibility. So again, not you know, there are limitations for that, but I think that is really important for you to reach out to them and see if there are opportunities. They really want people to do research at the VA, and so they really do make an effort to bend the rules a little bit and be a little bit flexible to accommodate the research that can be done.
Another question for you, and that really relates to what Minnie asked about funding mechanisms for international investigators. So in addition to the NIH, you know, the R01 mechanism, what other mechanisms are there for international investigators?
Yeah, so most of the foundation grants do not require citizenship or even permanent residency status. I have had junior faculty as well as trainees, postdoctoral trainees that are international on a J1 visa or an H1B visa that have been able to apply for these foundation awards, particularly the ASN, as well as American Heart. So I think definitely look at those funding mechanisms. I have a question for Susan and Raquel, actually. So let's say that after fellowship, you know, a junior faculty, maybe 5 or 6 years later, got a master's degree in science or clinical research, et cetera. So does that mean that their early stage investigator status is extended another 5 years, or no? Or does that master degree not count as a terminal degree?
Master's degree would not be a terminal degree. So the clock starts at the end of either when you get your PhD or when you complete your postgraduate training, your fellowship. So if you did another fellowship, but you can't restart the clock once it stops. So whether you do however many fellowships you do sequentially, it's the end of your fellowship. That's when the clock starts.
Minnie, you have a question?
Yes, thank you for answering the bit about the international investigators. But just to clarify, I meant people who are not even living in the US. So not just people who don't have residency or who don't have sort of, but I'm not based in the US at all. And so I want to conduct the research outside of the US.
An R01, an international investigator can apply for an R01 from wherever country they're in, or a US investigator can apply for an R01 in order to conduct research in another country. It can go either way.
Okay,
There's a little bit more paperwork, but in the end, it's a pay line question. There are a few countries in which it's a little bit harder. And we can discuss the politics of which countries are somewhat harder to get funding from. But it would come down to you'll talk to a program officer if you are in one of those countries, if you wish to do that. But in general, yes, it's possible.
So going back to the same question that Minnie asked, for foundations, can you be in another, apart from the Gates Foundation, which is obviously well known for funding outside the country, are there other foundations, say like Thrasher or the Gerber Foundation? Do they fund outside the country also?
Well, I don't have the answer to that particular question. I think it's most important to actually go to each of those foundation and ask what the qualification criteria are. I'm guessing if they are called American Society of so-and-so, they probably would only fund people that are conducting research within the United States, but again, that's just a wild guess on my part. I think it's most important to make sure that regardless of whether or not it's internationally conducted research, that you establish that the resources are available and the feasibility is there to be able to do that research, no matter what funding mechanism it is.
That's correct. Feasibility and the institutional infrastructure to administer the award. And obviously, if it's a country that's under US sanctions, it's not going to happen no matter what.
Thank you.
We may have time for one more question, but I just want to remind everybody that we very much appreciate your feedback and would appreciate your completing the post-webinar survey. Tajid put the link in the chat. We want to continue to address the needs of the members of the NKC and find appropriate topics and speakers. So please let us know. Are there any?
Again, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I forgot to post my email, but I think you can probably get my email from the organizer for this webinar.
Yeah, we want to thank our panelists and everybody who zoomed in, and have a good rest of your day.
Been a pleasure, and good luck to all of you with your grant applications.
Agree. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.